Adobe Digital Editions. Star Trek_Deep Space Nine. A Stitch in Time. Andrew J. Robinson. EPUB window. Focus on book content text. Terrain from inside book content text. What? This was too much of a leap in logic for Fat Sharaban. What maneuver? Draver didn't understand either, but that only increased his attention. Stealth. To Sharaban. Did you leave the room or is it getting too late for you? Sharaban was sharp with his second. He turned back to me. It's even more difficult than that. Whoever you use can only come from your group. And as you decide how many you will need, remember that once inside the rock formation you will have to throw up an effective resistance to create the diversion we need. Sharaban was pushing me now. With phasers we should be. No phasers inside the rocks, Sharaban interrupted. Only outside. Once you get in its hand-to-hand combat. Sharaban pushed me even harder. What's your plan? 10 ? 6 men. 2 groups of 3. I was sweating with the effort to visualize the operation as I studied the diagram. Yes. Sharaban urged. I lead one group along the southern flank. Which is the more difficult one? One Lubac will lead the... No, corrected Sharaban. You can't use one. Why not? I asked. Because he will resent your leadership. He already regards you as a threat. One must never know what you're doing. That means I can't use any of his allies. I was worried as to how I was going to assemble a team with what was left of the group. Unless they find greater opportunity with you. To Sharaban's tone was almost civil. Opportunity. Of course. Ambition. The power is with the leader others are willing to follow because he promises them an advantage they lack. I began to see what the exchange was. Who leads the other team? Sharaban wasn't finished. 8. Logically the best choice, once I got beyond my obligation to one Lubac. And if he's the pit warrior you claimed he is, then he should work with the others. Sharaban remembered my assessment and challenged its truth. It's crucial that the members of your group perform well in the combat phase, added Draver. Besides 8 and myself there was 5. And 3. I detested 3. Plus he was an ally of 1. But his massive strength was matched by his ferocity. Sharaban knew that I was struggling with choice. Whoever they are, 10, just make sure that Ray McClellan hasn't already recruited them. Our task is difficult enough. Betrayal would make it nearly impossible, he warned. And betrayal means that the leader has failed to earn the trust of his men. Fat Sharaban added to a warning. When I had finished cleaning the last room and replaced the implements, the first colors of dawn were stretching across the desert and lighting my way back to the first level compound. I was exhausted from the long night's test. I had made my first alliance, and was now part of a cohort looking to seize political power by an act of force. I felt stripped and exposed. The boy who had played among the stately monuments in the Tarlac sector and pretended to heroism and great deeds had been left behind. Now that I was faced with the hard work of actual leadership, the fear of failure, the very thing Sharaban told me there was no room for, had assumed new dimensions. Find your allies, I heard Calyx say, and work from there. That morning 8 and I were assigned to a construction unit repairing an old barrier on the western perimeter. I told him I needed to talk without other ears, and we managed to work ourselves away from the rest of the team. He knew about the competition, and he knew that the Ray McClellan and the Sharaban were recruiting. It happened that he had an appointment to meet with a Ray McClellan recruiter that evening. But I knew I'd be contacted by you, he said as a simple matter of fact. How? I asked. Sharaban warned me. 8 studied my confused reaction. He didn't tell you we spoke. Book content text. No. Anger replaced confusion, but we had to continue our work of identifying weak sections of wall and marking them for repair. And I had to continue assembling my team. What did he say? He asked me to be involved. When he told me you were committed I agreed. Again, simply stated. We scraped the wall to cover our conversation. Thank you, I said with relief. Kate was a difference between success and the abyss, especially with the others. Kate was respected by everyone, even 3. One despised him, but he harmed 8 at the expense of his own leadership stature. He said you were leading our team, and that he would make the assignments. That's quite an honor. In his quiet way 8 was impressed. I described our mission and what I wanted from him. He would take 5 and 3 to penetrate the northern flank while I led 2 and 4 on the southern. I explained my choices, based on the restrictions Sharaban had given me. He take 2, 8 said. Why? I asked. He can't be trusted, especially if one is not involved. Their family. How did everybody except me have this personal information? If 2 agrees, chances are he's a Ramaclan spy. Who's left? I was certain there was no one. 7, he replied. He's too wrong. His reges have barely emerged. We need fighters, I protested. He is great heart, and he's loyal. I'll make sure he's ready to fight, 8 assured me. I'll take him on my team and you take 3. That'll be the challenge. If you can't get 3 past their flank undetected. The signal to stop working interrupted 8, but I knew what he meant. Stealth requires the kind of sustained patience that's almost totally missing in 3. If there's no room for failure, then there must be a solution to every problem. I wanted very much to believe that indeed was so. Book content text. 16 entry : during the period leading to the competition, my only respite from the preparations was when Palantine and I managed to spend some time together. Besides the training area, we would meet in the secluded study nooks of the archival center and in sections of the grounds she knew would be safe. Tonight we were in an enclosure of the grounds that was made impenetrable by the thick surrounding foliage. This was the place she had wanted to show me before we were interrupted by the intern at the center. Our conversations covered all the areas that were forbidden: names, personalities, family backgrounds, and most important, the true power structure of Bamaran. The institute was a microcosm of Carter Science Society, and the adults, prefects, docents, and custodians controlled from a distance. The idea was that students would become more effective citizens of the greater culture if they learned how to administer the microcosm themselves. There was a constant striving upwards at Bamaran, just as there was in the greater society, and at the highest levels that striving was transmuted into imperial expansion. The students of Bamaran were the future guardians of Carter Science security. We would become the eyes and ears of the military, the diplomats and the politicians. In these meetings Palantine was teaching me how to use my eyes and ears in a manner that complemented the teachings of Calyx and Mila. And you have to use that wonderful smile of yours more often. What's that got to do with listening? That was the subject, and Palantine had typically made a jump in logic I couldn't follow. She also forgot that I was a Carter Science male and smiling was not one of our strong features. If they feel comfortable with you, people will tell you stories about themselves that will reveal their deepest secrets. But what if the stories aren't true? I challenged. I could smile till my cheeks hurt, and you could tell me any kind of story you wanted, and what would I know about you except what you invented? You would know, if you were truly listening, the kind of story I use to define myself, she asserted. But it's not the truth. I maintained. Why not? Because it's not what you believe, or it doesn't fit the definition of the truth that someone taught you. Look at people, Lim. Palantine gestured as if the enclosure were filled with people. Observe them. The way they walk and talk, the way they hold themselves and eat their meals. That's what they believe about themselves. Is it the truth? Are they really that way? I don't know. Perhaps it is a lie. But what people lie about the most are themselves, and these lies become the stories they believe and want to tell you. As long as I'm smiling, I mumbled. This conversation had started when I complained that others, especially Palantine, seemed to have information that was inaccessible to me. It progressed into one of our heated discussions relating intelligence gathering to the nature of truth itself. Truth, as we've learned to define it, is not only overrated, she went on with a controlled passion. It's designed to keep people in the dark. This last statement stopped me. You mean the way we've been taught? I asked. Of course. What about our government? They tell us the stories that we need to know in order to be good citizens, she replied carefully. They don't tell us the truth, is what you're saying, I concluded. Book content text. There you go again. They tell us their truth, Lim, and we are here to learn how to listen. Palantine paused and gave me one of her looks that went to the back of my head and made me shiver. You're so serious, Lim, so glum that even before you open your mouth you're telling a story. But the non-verbal stories are the most dangerous, because they can be interpreted any number of ways. You have to smile, because you have power. If you listen to people with the look you have on your face right now, they'll suspect that you'll disapprove or criticize or even worse laugh at their stories. And there's nothing worse than being ridiculed. You know that. And I did. Perhaps that was why I was so resistant to the idea of smiling. It made me feel vulnerable to others, the way I had with Sharaban that night at the central gate. Let the ones without power scowl and make fierce faces. You smile. It's an invitation to connect with another person. And once the invitation is accepted, relax and listen. You'll come to know as much as you'll ever need to about that person, she said with a smile that I greedily accepted. Palantine also introduced me to poetry, particularly the work of Maren Breed, who was notorious for being critical of the Bajoran occupation. Ghosted light, colored by the gas and burst of the Corellian nebula, dances in my dreams and ascends like a shimmering wave here. It fills the space between sleep and wake and clothes my loneliness with your naked birth. She opened her eyes and the light from the blind moon, the third and weakest in our system, reflected the excitement she felt in his poetry. At that moment I could have died and gone to the Hall of Memories if I'd been able to take this moment with me. Yes, solar wines, a voice said behind me, so soft as to be almost unrecognizable. I also enjoy his paean to Kundera. The price they paid in blood is returned to the Eor healing cause my patriarch, keeper of the mysteries and companion to those heroes who stood between you and eternal night. It was Sharaban, and as stunning as his sudden presence was the choice of poem. Kundera unfavorably contrasts the celebrated victory against the Klingons with the Bajoran occupation. He stood there, watching us with a bemused expression, framed by the narrow opening of fendel leaves that connected the pathway to our green and muffled enclosure. With his easy grace and smile, it was as if he'd always been here. I didn't know you liked Maren Breed, Barkan. Valentine behaved as if she expected him. You never asked. Valentine, he replied, amused by this use of their names. And what kind of example are we setting for Elim? Correct. This was the first time I had heard my full name since I had left home, and it suddenly made me feel self-conscious. I stood up awkwardly. No, please, Sharaban motioned me back down. I didn't mean to disrupt your poetry reading. Valentine's laugh was more delighted than ever. No, said the Mogarun. I didn't mean to take the bad children to the subterranean city, she said with Mogarun ferocity. I hope you're not comparing me to the Mogarun, Sharaban said with mock outrage. Book content text. Well, I suppose you're a little better looking than that, Valentine allowed. The Mogarun was a spiky lump with several frightening red eyes. Unless there are some wrongs here I need to right. Sharaban imitated the creature's voice, which was easier for him since his own voice was already halfway there. I knew they were enjoying the banter, but I felt caught in the middle, and vulnerable. According to the rules, I was in a place I did not belong, with a female student, indulging in personal excesses. But if the two of them were concerned, they certainly didn't show it. I never would have guessed the two of you shared a love of poetry, Sharaban said with genuine surprise. Who exposed us? Valentine asked. Drabber. I asked him to do a security check on Tenlubac. You're not the Raymaclin spy, are you, one Carrie Eve? He asked with the same lack of concern. Her answer was another laugh and a provocative look that challenged any and all assumptions he dared make about her. I jumped up. I swear, I began, trying to overcome a very dry mouth. I've told her nothing of our plans, one Sharaban, and she has never asked. It was true, we talked about everything except our work. Why not? Aren't they worth talking about? He asked with a serious face. I had no idea how to respond. You read confusing him, Barkan. That's not very nice. My apologies. Believe me, Ten, I would have been surprised if you had. But Drabber thought he had, she said. No, actually, it was to Sharaban, he replied. So this security check is now common knowledge, she rightly observed. I had the same thought. This is as far as it goes, he assured her. Valentine nodded in response, giving him a last careful look. Sharaban smiled back with an openness that seemed to answer her concern. He sat down on a rock, gave me a look that was more reappraisal, and then looked away. In the ensuing silence, each of us became involved with our own private thoughts. In the corner where she sat cross-legged, Valentine studied her exquisitely shaped hands. Now, with the three of us, the dynamic in the enclosure had changed, and we were all adjusting. I no longer had Valentine to myself, but surprisingly, I didn't mind. In fact, I was pleased that Sharaban was here. His stillness, like everything else about him, had grace and strength. I sneaked another look in his direction and marveled that this was the same person I had first encountered in the storeroom. He returned my look, and in the next few moments a bond grew between us that I had never thought possible. The whooshing flap of a night bird pulled our attention up to the section of glimmering sky that was visible. "I love the blind moon," Sharaban said softly. "Why is it called that?" I asked, deeply relieved by the mysterious change that had come over us. "It's the time for lovers' assignations," Valentine answered. "The moon will give them enough light to meet, but not so much for them to be discovered. So if you and Elim were true lovers I wouldn't have been able to find you," Sharaban teased. "That's right, Barkan," she said with a direct look. I shifted position in the ensuing silence and tried to hide my disappointment with Valentine's reply, but at the same time, the pleasure I felt in the company of these two people kept growing. "See," Valentine suddenly addressed me. "You can do it." "What?" I was startled by her delighted burst. "Smile." "Look at that, Barkan. Wouldn't you tell someone with that smile everything he wanted to know?" she demanded. "The first time I met him, well, the second." He corrected himself. He had a smile that I wanted to wipe off his face. He was referring to that early morning in front of the central gate. "But it wasn't that smile," Valentine insisted. "No," he conceded. "Definitely not that one." And the truth was that I could feel this smile throughout my entire body. Book content text. We settled into another silence that lasted until the blind moon disappeared behind the foliage. I was certain at the time that for each of us this silent gathering was a precious respite from the relentless strivings of Bama and ambition. There were other such gatherings, but this was the one that I will take with me to the Hall of Memories. If I could have stopped time. Book content text. 17 entry : Today I thought I'd have lunch at the recently reopened Klingon establishment in honor of my new friend from the Jeffries Tube, who turns out to be a nephew of General Martok. As I made my way through the promenade, which gets more congested every day, I thought of the Durbo girl, Tir Rimara, and wondered why her name was so familiar. Odo said she wanted to see me to express her gratitude, and I laughed at the irony. A Bajoran wanting to thank a Cardassian. On a sudden impulse, I redirected myself to Quark. When I entered the bar, Quark smirked at me. "The savior of Durbo girls. You know, Garak, you used to have a wonderful reputation as someone who minded his own business. What happened? Was it a bad brand of Konar?" "No worse than usual," I smiled. "The master of compassion, our friend Quark. But judging from the large and loud group of Klingons present, he needn't have worried about a drop in business." Rimara saw me, and we made eye contact. She finished paying out latinum from the last spin of the wheel, motioned to another girl to take over the table, and approached me. Quark was not pleased. "Make it fast, Rimara. The Klingons are here for you, not Violet." Quark stayed as if to monitor our conversation, but Rimara just looked at him with a level, clear expression. He blinked. "You heard me." And he moved away. When she turned those clear, gray eyes to me, I immediately understood why so many people wanted to play Durbo when she was spinning the wheel. "Thank you for yesterday," she said simply. "Well, I don't think." I was astounded I couldn't get a clear sentence out of my mouth. But she knew what I was going to say. "He was very drunk and he was going to hurt me. He's not a bad man, but he's the type who's dangerous past a certain point." I could only nod in agreement. She was older than I had originally thought, and clearly more intelligent than the usual Durbo girl. She was as much of a girl as I was a boy. Other than Leda, this was the first Durbo woman I had ever seen. I'm sure her popularity among the Klingons must be immense, otherwise Quark would never allow such intelligence and maturity to spin the wheel. As I stood there, I totally forgot that she was wearing that silly skimpy outfit. Her poise, the directness of her gaze. I also forgot that she was a Bajoran. "I have to return to work, but I'd like to talk with you. We had a mutual friend." "I'm done after the second shift." "Is that too late for you?" And no, not at all. My lips were betraying me. I sounded like "Shall I meet you here?" No. The observation lounge on the second level. As she went back to the table I noticed Major Kira sitting in the corner. She was giving me the same look she had used whenever I had been in the company of Zeal. Because of those hard, impenetrable eyes, I can only imagine what she thought of this exchange. I nodded and smiled. It was late, and there were few people on the second level. As I waited in the observation lounge, it came to me why Rimara's name was familiar. She'd been a friend of Zeal. I remembered now Zeal saying that Rimara was some kind of teacher on Bahar, and that she occasionally worked as a Debo girl to support her family. When she'd made enough latinum she'd return to her life on Bahar. Quark put up with this arrangement because her statuesque beauty attracted many people, not just Klingons, and not just meant to the Debo table. Even those who never played. Book content text. Thank you for coming. Her voice came from behind me. I jumped up from my chair, surprised. She was standing there in a tasteful but modest frock. Without her Debo girl shoes we stood eye to eye. Her face was scrubbed clean of the makeup and her hair was unpinned, falling below her shoulders. It was somewhat darker now, and I wondered if she lightened it somehow when she was working. There was also a distance in her look which, coupled with her directness, created an odd dynamic. The distance challenged you to work yourself closer if you had the courage. You surprised me, I said, reminding myself to breathe. I expected you to come from the other direction. I wanted to get out of my child's costume. I hope you're not disappointed. Please, I laughed. I'm relieved. To be truthful, I'm not terribly comfortable around those outfits. Really? Are they too revealing for you? She asked. Not at all. The design puts my teeth on edge. It was her turn to laugh. Amazing, isn't it? People seem to like the way they look. I don't think it's the way the costume looks that they love, I offered. Well, she smiled modestly, I'm not complaining. It keeps the Debo wheel spinning. Which pleases Quark to no end, I added. Indeed. She took one of the chairs, and I sat in one across from her. Elim, isn't it? Yes. Elim, correct. Zeal spoke well of you. She was particularly grateful for your kindness. This always intrigued me. Why? I asked, knowing full well what was coming. You read a Cardassian. There's nothing I can't do about that, I'm afraid. We looked at each other for a long moment, and the distance felt even greater. I wondered if anyone had ever made the crossing. I think Zeal once mentioned that you were a teacher. I shifted the focus onto her. In a manner of speaking, I'm a counselor. When I'm not being a Debo girl, of course. My work here is to counsel people out of their latinum. And on Bahar, I asked. I counsel people out of their nightmares from the occupation, she said, without any inflection. I replied, with as genial a smile as I could muster. And you're a tailor. I am. Have you always been a tailor? Has anyone always been anything? Were you trained as one? In a manner of speaking. For that and other things. Like? I worked as a gardener for a period, I replied. She was unapologetic about her questions. Either she had a great appetite for information about other people, or something else was going on. I love to garden, she said. Really? You're very fortunate then. Bahar has a salubrious climate for growing things. So you've been to Bahar? She asked. No. Not really. Not really, she repeated with a bemused look. I stopped over once. On the way here actually. Just long enough to transfer to a shuttle. But your climate is well known. In Cardassia, she added. Yes. Among other places, I'm sure. A game was in full operation now, and I felt excited and challenged to find out just what the game was.